In 1701, a man sat in a prison cell in Wiener Neustadt, Austria, waiting to be executed. He wasn't a rebel, he wasn't a troublemaker, he was one of the wealthiest noblemen in Hungary, educated by Jesuits, groomed by the very empire that now wanted him dead. His crime? Writing a letter to the King of France. 2 years later, this same man was riding at the head of a 70,000-strong army, fighting the most powerful dynasty in Europe. His name was Francis II Rákóczi, and this is the story of how the Habsburgs accidentally created their greatest enemy. To understand why Rakoczi matters, you have to understand what Hungary looked like in the late 1600s. For over 150 years, Hungary had been split into 3 pieces. The Ottoman Empire controlled the Central Plains. The Habsburgs held a narrow strip in the north and west, what they called Royal Hungary. And the Principality of Transylvania survived in the east as a semi-independent buffer state, playing both sides to stay alive. Then everything changed. In 1683, the Ottomans marched on Vienna and lost. The Habsburgs launched a massive counteroffensive. City after city fell. Buda was liberated in 1686. By 1699, the Treaty of Karlowitz forced the Ottoman Empire to surrender nearly all of Hungary. For the first time in a century and a half, Hungary was united. The people celebrated. The celebrations didn't last long. The Habsburg court in Vienna did not treat Hungary like a liberated nation. They treated it like conquered territory. Noble families had to prove land ownership with old documents that generations of warfare had destroyed. If they couldn't prove it, or couldn't pay the 10% fee the Habsburgs demanded, they lost everything. Their ancestral estates, gone. Handed over to Habsburg military officers and their creditors. The peasants suffered even more. Crushed under wartime taxes, with soldiers quartered in their homes and their Protestant faith under constant pressure from Catholic counter-Reformation policies, many Hungarians began asking a question that tells you everything about how bad things were. Was life under the Ottomans actually better? That resentment, that slow-burning fury, would become Francis Rákóczi's army. Francis II Rákóczi was born on March 27, 1676, in Borsy Castle, Zemplén County. His bloodline reads like a catalogue of Habsburg enemies. His father, Francis I Rákóczi, was the elected ruling prince of Transylvania and a key figure in the Wesselini conspiracy, a failed plot to overthrow Habsburg rule. His mother, Ilona Zrínyi, was the daughter of Peter Zrínyi, the Ban of Croatia, who was executed by the Habsburgs. This family had been a thorn in the Habsburg side for decades. His father died when Francis was barely 3 months old. His mother then married Imre Türköly, a Kurik nobleman who openly led a rebellion against the Habsburgs with Ottoman backing. Young Francis grew up in a household defined by defiance. Then the world collapsed. In 1685, Türköly's rebellion failed. Habsburg forces closed in. Ilona Zrínyi refused to surrender. She barricaded herself inside Munkács Castle in what is today Ukraine, with her children, her valuables, and a garrison of defenders. She held that castle for 2.5 years. On January 17, 1688, she was finally forced to yield after months of negotiations. The Habsburg revenge was swift and calculated. Ilona was taken to Vienna. Rákóczi's sister Juliana was imprisoned in an Ursuline convent. And 11-year-old Francis, heir to one of the greatest noble fortunes in the Kingdom of Hungary, was shipped off to a Jesuit college in Neuhaus, Bohemia. The Habsburgs weren't just defeating his family, they were remaking him. Over the next decade, Francis II Rákóczi was carefully shaped into a loyal Habsburg subject, Catholic education, a prestigious court appointment in Vienna, his inheritance restored, a noble title, Count of Saros County, in 1694, and a prestigious marriage to Princess Charlotte Amalie of Hesse-Wanfried. They had 3 children together. By every measure, the Habsburgs had succeeded. He was one of them. And then he went home to Hungary. What he found there broke the illusion. The land he'd been granted on paper was a country suffering in reality. His tenants, his own serfs, were being crushed by taxes, religious persecution, and the systematic theft of their livelihoods by the very court he had grown up in. The grooming had failed. Francis II Rákóczi began making plans. In 1700, Rákóczi made his first move. Through diplomatic back channels, he contacted Louis XIV of France, the Habsburgs' great rival, seeking financial support for an uprising. He was betrayed almost immediately. His letter to the French king was intercepted. In 1701, Habsburg agents arrested him and threw him in the Wiener Neustadt prison. Execution was expected. What happened next is worthy of a film. With the help of his wife Charlotte and a network of sympathetic court insiders, Rákóczi pulled off one of the most daring prison escapes of the 18th century. He fled in disguise in the middle of the night. He made it north to Poland, where he resumed his diplomatic campaign in exile, still working to secure French backing, still watching Hungary for an opening. That opening came in 1703. 2 things aligned perfectly. First, the War of the Spanish Succession had broken out across Western Europe, pulling the bulk of Habsburg military forces westward. The garrisons in Hungary were undermanned. Second, in the Tiszahat region, a serf leader named Tamás Ese had organized a spontaneous peasant uprising. His rebels captured several small towns and castles, but they knew they needed something more, a leader with nobility behind his name, someone who could unite the peasants and the nobility. They sent a delegation to Poland. They asked Rákóczi. On June 15, 1703, Francis II Rákóczi crossed back into Hungary. He issued a proclamation unlike anything the country had seen. He called on nobles and non-nobles, serfs and princes together to take up arms. In a society built on rigid class hierarchy, this was radical. He wasn't promising a noble rebellion. He was promising a nation. Within months, his army grew from a few thousand ragged rebels to tens of thousands of fighters. The Kuruc, as his forces were called, were a force the Habsburgs had not anticipated. The war had begun. What followed was 8 years of one of the most dramatic military-political campaigns in Central European history. Rákóczi wasn't just a battlefield commander. He was a statesman. In 1704, the Hungarian Diet elected him Prince of Transylvania. He built a functioning government, a chancellery, diplomatic missions to foreign courts, a working taxation system. He was fighting for more than a military victory. He wanted international recognition, a legitimate sovereign Hungary. His alliance with France brought money, advisors, and a contingent of French soldiers. He sent diplomats to Sweden, Poland, and the Ottoman Empire. He was playing the full European chessboard. On the battlefield, neither side could land a decisive blow. The Kuruc cavalry was fast, mobile, and knew the terrain intimately. The Habsburg army was better disciplined and better supplied. They traded victories and defeats across years of grinding warfare. At the height of his power, Rákóczi controlled approximately 2/3 of the Kingdom of Hungary. He came within striking distance of Vienna. For the first time in decades, the Habsburgs looked genuinely vulnerable. But here is what most history books gloss over. Rákóczi's biggest enemy was never on a battlefield. It was in the halls of Versailles. If you're finding this story as fascinating as I am, you'll want to subscribe to Past Unlocked History. This is exactly the kind of story we chase. The men and women who shaped entire empires and then got left out of the textbooks. Hit subscribe and the notification bell so you never miss one. Now, back to Rakoczi, because this is where it gets complicated. In 1706, Louis XIV of France was facing catastrophic military defeats across Western Europe in the War of the Spanish Succession. He began negotiating a ceasefire with the Habsburgs. French support for Hungary quietly evaporated. The money stopped. The advisors went home. Rákóczi was now fighting the full weight of the Habsburg military machine, alone. In 1708, at the Battle of Trenčín, his Kuruk forces suffered a devastating defeat. It wasn't just a military loss, it broke the morale of the nobility who had been sitting on the fence. Defections began. Resources dried up. The network of support that had sustained 8 years of war started to unravel. By 1710, the war was effectively over. In a painful final twist, Rákóczi's own generals began negotiating behind his back. On May 1st, 1711, his commander, Sándor Károly, signed the Treaty of Szatmár with the Habsburgs. Rákóczi refused to sign. Now here's something remarkable about that treaty. The Habsburgs, exhausted, wanting peace, were actually generous. They offered full amnesty to all Kuruk fighters. They preserved Hungary's feudal constitution. They guaranteed religious freedoms for Protestants. They repealed many of the harshest decrees that had sparked the war in the first place. By the standards of the era, it was a reasonable peace. Many of his fighters accepted it, but Francis II Rákóczi could not bring himself to kneel before the dynasty that had taken everything from him. He walked away. He went into exile, first to Poland, then to France, where he spent years at Versailles, still trying and failing to rally European support for Hungary. Then, at the invitation of the Ottoman Sultan, to the small coastal town of Tekirdağ on the European shore of Turkey. The Hungarians called it Rodosto. He spent the last 20 years of his life there, writing his memoirs, writing his prayers, never seeing Hungary again. He died on April 8, 1735. Here is the paradox at the heart of this story. Francis II Rákóczi lost the war. Hungary would remain under Habsburg rule for another century and a half. And yet, he is one of the most revered figures in all of Hungarian history. Why? Because the Treaty of Szatmár, which ended the war, was shaped by 8 years of Rákóczi's resistance. Hungary kept its constitution. The parliament survived as the supreme legislative body. Religious minorities received amnesty. The Habsburgs never successfully absorbed Hungary into a fully centralized empire. The war Rákóczi fought and lost preserved the legal and cultural identity of Hungary for generations. His legacy didn't fade. The Rákóczi March, a stirring, defiant piece of music written in his honor, became one of the most recognized compositions in Hungarian history. Franz Liszt reworked it into a famous piano rhapsody. Hector Berlioz arranged it for orchestra. It echoed across concert halls in Paris, Vienna, and London. In 1906, nearly 2 centuries after his death, the Austro-Hungarian government finally allowed Rákóczi's remains to be brought home. A state funeral was held. Thousands of Hungarians lined the streets. His bones were interred in St. Elizabeth's Cathedral in Kosice, alongside his mother, Ilona Zrínyi, the woman who had held Munkács Castle for 2.5 years so her children might survive. Mother and son, together finally in Hungarian soil. Today, Francis II Rákóczi's face appears on the Hungarian 500 forint banknote. Statues of him stand across Hungary, Slovakia, and Ukraine. Towns, streets, and schools carry his name. The man the Habsburgs tried to make their own became the enduring symbol of everything they could never conquer. History is full of people like Francis II Rákóczi, men and women shaped by the powers that oppressed them, who turned that very shaping into the weapon they used to fight back. He didn't win, but the way he didn't win changed Hungary forever. If this story got under your skin, hit the like button. It really helps this channel reach more people who love history as much as we do. Subscribe to Past Unlocked History if you haven't already, and drop a comment. What surprised you most? The prison escape, the French alliance, or the fact that he refused to sign the peace treaty even after the war was already lost? I'll see you in the next one.